We often assume that the hardest part of healing is confronting the shadow itself, dragging our pain into the light, staring at what we were taught to avoid. But few of us are prepared for what follows: the silence after the storm, the strange stillness that arrives not with joy, but with disorientation. After the breakthrough comes the bewilderment. You've survived the fall, but now, who are you without your wounds? There's an odd grief that arises when you step beyond the trauma. The chaos that once defined your days is gone, but so is the identity built around it. You're no longer drowning, but you're not yet swimming. You stand ankle deep in still waters, unsure of what direction to walk, afraid that peace might be a trick, or worse, a test. This isn't a return to life. This is life version 2.0, and your nervous system hasn't downloaded the update. You keep reaching for old reactions, old patterns, old roles, but they don't fit anymore. They slide off your shoulders like a coat you've outgrown. And now, the very habits that once protected you feel like a cage you've locked from the inside. You might feel guilt for not being more grateful. You should be celebrating, right? You made it out. But instead, you feel hollow, restless, lonely even. Because growth is a lonely process. When you stop screaming, the world goes quiet. And in that quiet, you're forced to meet parts of yourself that were buried beneath survival. Here's where many people turn back, not because the past was better, but because it was familiar. Because rebuilding a self from scratch requires a terrifying kind of honesty. You're not who you were. You're not quite who you'll become. You are the ache between identities, and so the real work begins, not just healing the wound, but learning to live with the scar. Not performing wholeness, but embodying it, quietly, gently, over time. You build a new rhythm, one without the chaos you once called normal, one that asks for slowness and stillness and trust. This is the in-between no one talks about, the phase after transformation, where you feel lost, not because you're failing, but because your compass hasn't caught up with your new landscape. The truth is, the end of suffering isn't the end of struggle. It's just the beginning of clarity. And clarity is sharp. It shows you what's real. It exposes what no longer serves you, and it demands you walk forward, even if the map has yet to be drawn. You faced your shadow and survived its storm. But what now? No one warns you that peace can feel more unfamiliar than pain. That quiet can be deafening after a lifetime of inner noise. The absence of struggle doesn't always bring relief. Sometimes it brings confusion. It's a peculiar sensation to wake up one morning and realize that you're no longer constantly scanning for danger, no longer bracing for emotional impact. The hypervigilance that once kept you alive now has nowhere to go. You're standing in calm waters, yet your muscles remain tense, expecting a wave. This is not weakness, it's programming. For years, you've danced with dysfunction. You knew the steps by heart. Conflict, avoidance, self-sacrifice. They were predictable partners. And now that the music has stopped, you're left alone on the floor, unsure how to move without someone else's chaos to orbit around. So you try to rebuild. But building a life from the ashes of survival isn't simply about choosing joy. It's about unlearning the belief that joy is a threat. Because for many of us, safety was never soft. It was tense, conditional, earned through perfection or invisibility. So peace feels suspicious. Love feels dangerous. And the most disorienting thing of all is realizing that the voice whispering, "This is too good to be true," isn't coming from outside. It's coming from within. That voice isn't evil, it's protective. It learned long ago that letting your guard down meant exposure, vulnerability, even harm. So now it clings to control. It seeks flaws in happiness. It prepares you for disaster, just in case. But here's the paradox. To fully live, we have to be willing to risk the fall, to stop rehearsing loss, to allow joy to land fully, even if it doesn't stay. We must make peace with impermanence, not just of love, but of our own transformation. Because even healing becomes a trap when we start performing it, when we treat it like a destination, a checklist, a new identity. True healing is not about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you were before the world taught you to forget. And that remembering doesn't happen in a flash. It unfolds slowly, in moments of discomfort that ask you to choose differently, to pause before reacting, to speak when you once swallowed, to stay when you once ran. to rest when you once pushed. This is where integration begins, not in grand epiphanies, but in small choices, daily acts of courage that rewire your nervous system to believe peace is safe, love is allowed, rest is not laziness. You don't have to earn your belonging by proving your pain. You are allowed to outgrow survival, and you are allowed to not feel ready. Most people think the shadow is what you fear in the dark, but the deeper truth, the real shadow, shows up in the light when things begin to go right. It whispers doubts when you finally feel ease. It resurfaces when you're on the brink of expansion, of self-trust, of receiving the love or success you once only dreamed of. Because for years, your nervous system was taught to equate intensity with intimacy, pain with attention, exhaustion with worth. So when life becomes quiet, your body doesn't always recognize it as safety. It mistakes it for emptiness, and instead of leaning into it, you brace, you anticipate, you sabotage. Here lies the quiet edge of shadow work, the parts of you that feel uncomfortable with being okay. The small inner voice that wonders, what if joy is temporary? What if peace is a setup? And then, without realizing it, you begin to engineer chaos again. Not because you want to suffer, but because suffering feels like home. It's not always loud. Sometimes it's in the way you overwork when things slow down, the way you push people away, right when connection deepens, the way you self-isolate, even when you crave touch. These aren't flaws. These are defense mechanisms, rooted in a time when control was survival and closeness was risk. The most dangerous thing about the shadow is not that it's dark, it's that it's clever. It adapts. After you've done the surface work, it doesn't scream anymore. It disguises itself as reason, logic, maturity.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Your feedback means a lot, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts.
It might say, don't get too comfortable, be realistic, don't be naive. So you downplay your success to stay likable. You shrink your joy to keep others from feeling small. You keep busy so you never have to sit in the quiet where real peace might meet you. And then you wonder why happiness still feels out of reach. But here's the turning point. Recognizing that your relationship with joy is not just emotional, it's neurological. Your brain, like any well-tuned instrument, plays what it knows. And if it has rehearsed fear, rejection, and urgency for years, then stillness feels off-key. Joy feels suspicious. Fulfillment feels like something you'll be punished for. This is why surviving the shadow is only step one. Thriving after it, that's the real test. It means choosing not to armor up when things go well. It means softening into ease, even if your muscles tremble with memory. It means holding the paradox that being safe can feel unsafe at first. You don't overcome the shadow by defeating it. You outgrow it. You choose again and again to respond from your current reality, not your past pain. You tell yourself, I don't need to suffer to prove I'm strong. I don't need to shrink to be loved. I don't need to hustle to deserve rest. This is how you reclaim your narrative, not with a grand declaration, but with 1,000 quiet moments of self-permission, of allowing joy to stay, of letting love in without questioning if it's a trick, of trusting that who you're becoming doesn't need to be earned, only remembered. Emerging from your shadow work is not the end. It's the quiet beginning of something more subtle, more fragile, and often more unnerving. The silence after the storm can be louder than the storm itself. When you've lived so long in survival mode, peace doesn't feel peaceful. It feels alien, suspicious, like walking into a home that looks like yours, but you can't find the light switch. You've spent years mastering the art of self-protection, sharp wit, thick skin, always prepared for the worst. And now that no one is attacking, your armor feels too heavy. You notice how you speak more softly, how you cry faster, how joy makes your heart race, not from excitement, but from anxiety, because something in you still believes joy is borrowed and the debt collector is on their way. This stage is the most misunderstood. People assume once you survive the shadow, you rise. But in truth, you stall, you stumble, you second-guess the stillness. You're not used to choosing. Your past often chose for you. Now that you have freedom, you don't know where to stand. Even your dreams confuse you. Not the ones at night, but the ones you buried to get through the years of chaos. They begin to resurface, not as bold declarations, but as whispers. Maybe I could rest. Maybe I deserve softness. Maybe life doesn't have to be so hard. And with every maybe comes a wave of grief. For all the years you believed the opposite. The healing work has brought you here, but integration is what roots you. Integration is not just, I survived. It's learning how to breathe again without armor. It's realizing that healing didn't erase the scars. It simply reminded you that they don't define you. But be warned, the old voices don't vanish. They adapt. The critic becomes clever. It says, you're not working hard enough. This is laziness, not peace. You've gone soft. And if you're not vigilant, you'll put the armor back on, not because you need it, but because it's familiar. Integration demands new habits. You start saying no without apology. You rest without guilt. You speak your truth, not to win an argument, but to stay connected to yourself. You no longer wait for disaster before giving yourself permission to change. You become proactive with your own peace. This is where your new self begins to form, not out of rebellion, but out of remembrance. You remember that you are not the sum of your trauma. You are not the shadow you faced. You are the one who chose to look at it, name it, and walk through the fire anyway. You realize your tenderness is not a weakness. It's the evidence of strength. Your boundaries are not walls. They're sacred gates. Your rest is not laziness. It's recalibration. Your joy is not naive. It's earned. And though there may be days where you miss the chaos because it was predictable, because it felt like home, you now know that you were never meant to live in a war zone. You were built for peace, for growth, for presence. The nervous system you once trained for threat is now being rewired for trust. The path ahead is not perfect. There will be regressions, fears, and tests, but you no longer fear falling apart, because now you know how to rebuild, not out of urgency, but out of intention. You're not chasing healing anymore. You're living from it. This is your emergence, not as a hero, not as a savior, but as someone who has chosen to stay, someone who now understands. The real work begins not when we face our darkness, but when we dare to build something beautiful in the light.